Ken Burns is here. 12 years ago, he made American history with his award-winning film, The Civil War. The 9-part, 11.5-hour documentary is still the highest-rated series in the history of public television. It won numerous awards, including 2 Emmys and a Peabody. The Civil War has now been completely remastered and is available on DVD. In addition, PBS is launching this weekend Ken Burns' American Stories, a new weekly series featuring Burns' documentaries. I am pleased to have him here back at this table because of my huge admiration for him and the work that he does. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
It is true. It is true. We've had great moments on this program talking about what you do. Just almost like as if I didn't know any of that. What is it you do?
I'm curious. I guess I'm curious about how my country ticks, and I've been making, I think, the same film over and over again, asking who are we, who are these strange and complicated people who call themselves Americans, and each film, of course, never answers the question, deepens it with each inquiry, and I'm just passionately concerned about why we are who we are and the kind of instructive conversation the present can have with the past and how medicinal that can be in certain circumstances.
To do what you do you come to the conclusion that there's something kind of an American exceptionalism, that there is something unique about the American experience that has nothing to do with whether you're conservative, liberal, moderate, or anything else? It has to do with whether you appreciate what is unique about us.
Yeah, and I chuckle when you ask that because that's thin ice.
I know.
This idea of exceptionalism, and I believe it, and at the same time, the danger to fall into hagiography if you're doing a biography, the danger of sort of just promoting and shoving those horrible, pernicious myths along decade after decade is right there too. So at the same time, you have to hold our country's feet to the fire, that if you do believe in its exceptionalism, if you do accept, as Lincoln said in 1862 to his address to Congress, that not only could we not accept history, could not forget history, that we are the last best hope of Earth, then you've got to also be incredibly critical at the same time.
So what makes us that way?
I think it's the fact that we're the only country on earth that's here because we agree to assent to certain words and ideas. You know, as the planes went into the towers a year ago, people crowded in my living room in New Hampshire, and we were very upset. And I remember pacing the room almost like a general, saying the idea is imperishable, the idea is imperishable. And I really believe that. And I think every other country on earth is there because they see themselves as an end in and of themselves. I mean, if you've ever met a Frenchman, you know what I'm talking about. But we're not here because of race, geography, conquest, religion, or economics. We're here because we agree to assent to certain principles.
No, we're special because of that.
And that helps make this narrative a little bit different. We're also founded on a monumental hypocrisy, race, which has provided me, I think, with the real crux of the work we've been doing over the last 25 years.
Right. I should make this point in terms of what you're going to see on public television. This is the 2002 schedule for Ken Burns' American Stories. September 30th, Statue of Liberty. October 7th, Frank Lloyd Wright 1. October 14th, Frank Lloyd Wright 2. The Brooklyn Bridge, Thomas Jefferson 1 and 2. Mark Twain 1 and 2. Jazz, Episode 4. Empire of the Air, the men who made radio. Thomas Hart Benton. The Shakers, Hands to Work, Hearts to God. And then Huey Long. Now, there's no baseball here.
Well, it's going to be in the spring. We're going to take a few weeks off, and then we're going to come back with other stuff that we've done, and we've thrown in the episode about the Negro Leagues and about baseball in the 50s.
The first one was Brooklyn Bridge.
Brooklyn Bridge, 1981.
You had just read David McCullough's book.
We had started this film company coming out of Hampshire College, 2 other friends, Buddy Squires and Roger Sherman. I'd gotten pneumonia. Another friend of mine handed me McCullough's paperback book. I read it. I walked out of the bedroom and said, "This is what we're doing." And they just grabbed me by both arms and led me back to bed. And thought
exactly.
It was
You'll be okay tomorrow morning.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it was, that was the beginning. It was the idea of using the voices of the past, of not treating the photographs at arm's length, but getting inside of them, treating the old photographs like they're live, like you're a feature filmmaker.
Now, you knew all that then, or did you sort of fall into that?
At Hampshire College, the 3 of us were taught by social documentary still photographers, Jerome Liebling, Elaine Mays, and they told us how much power was in the single image to communicate. So rather than my colleagues who were sort of discouraged by having photographs, wished they had newsreel, we were reveling in photographs and the possibilities of finding drama within a still photograph. So I still think the best compliment we ever had was from the little old lady at the Brooklyn Museum at the film's premiere saying, "Where did you get those newsreels of the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge?" And I couldn't convince her that they were still photographs. And I still to this day think, you know, we did it. That was
All right.
okay.
We got a lot to see here this evening, so let's start with Brooklyn Bridge, 1981, first documentary for PBS, nominated for an Academy Award. The clip gives a brief introduction to the bridge's construction and impact on the populace. And guess who provides the voiceover? The one and only David McCullough. Here it is.
It was the biggest bridge in the world. Everyone in Brooklyn and New York agreed. It had absolutely no rivals. The bridge was the vision of John A. Roebling, an immigrant, a genius, a civil engineer. And it was finally completed under the most difficult circumstances imaginable by his son, Washington Roebling. The bridge was half again as big as any built before it. Its 2 stone towers were taller than any structure on either shore, taller than anything else on the entire North American continent. The roadway of the bridge was as spacious as Fifth Avenue, and down the center of the roadway, above the traffic, was an elevated promenade where people could go to enjoy the views of the bay and of the cities as never before. And the distinctive network of cables that suspended the bridge was made of steel, the new metal of a new age. It took 14 long years to build the bridge, from 1869 to 1883, years during which Edison invented the light bulb and the phonograph, Alexander Graham Bell the telephone. The buffalo were exterminated on the Great Plains. The curveball and catcher's mask were introduced into baseball. President Chester A. Arthur installed plumbing in the White House. In Europe, Marx died, and Einstein, Lenin, and Picasso were born.
So there we go, number one. What was the response to that?
Well, it was wonderful. I mean, when you become a documentary filmmaker, you take a vow of anonymity and poverty, and the first film is nominated for an Oscar, and suddenly you're selling it to schools, and you actually look like you could survive modestly. And I'd moved out of New York to New Hampshire, to the same house I'm living in now, just because I thought it was a place you could go to the mattresses. Remember what Mario Puzo said, when things are tough?
Right.
You go to the mattresses. We went to New Hampshire to go to the mattresses, and we stayed 25 years. But it was great. And
okay, now how did you divide up the responsibility between you, Roger, and Buddy?
Well, Buddy was originally my assistant cinematographer, but if you did an interview, you couldn't make eye contact with the subject and shoot at the same time. So I said, Buddy, you're going to have to shoot it. And all of a sudden, Buddy's the greatest documentary cinematographer there is. And later, he and I co-produced the film on the Statue of Liberty. Roger was the sound man, and we all produced it. So it was all together. It was like just a very, very tight family.
You get along?
Yeah, I mean, we go, ups and downs. Now we're fabulously close.
Oh, yes, everybody's successful. That's great.
No, and we still see each other all the time, and love each other. It was a really important time.
And does Buddy shoot everything you do?
As much as he can. We had one other guy that does it. I still do a lot of cinematography of the archives and live cinematography, but Buddy's our first choice.
What is the most satisfying element of this process for you?
I'm sorry, there's 3. When you're shooting and you're out at dawn and you're on the white cliffs of the Missouri where Lewis and Clark went through, and all of a sudden you're there and you've taken a shot and you know it's going to be in the film. There's nothing better. There's a physical demand. It's using your eyes, and I love it. The other one's in the editing room when you these moribund still photographs suddenly come together. You take something out, you put something in, you rewrite a sentence, you clop off this, or you add something else, or somebody says, wait, we've got something that Shelby said, and you put it in, and suddenly a scene comes together that wasn't there. It was like breathing life on something. It's very exciting. And the rest of it is this evangelical dimension. It's sitting here talking with you. It's talking to going around the country.
You know, you enjoy doing it, and you're good at it, and you're good at it for one simple reason. The passion that you have.
I love this country.
For the story and the country. I mean, it's not so much all of that. Yeah. And the idea of getting your hands around big ideas.
That's right. I mean, I remember when I told my dad I was going to do the Civil War, he said, what part? And I said, all of it. And he just shook his head and walked out of the room because, of course, it was absurd and probably naive to do that. But I think when you go with that idea that you could bite off more than you could chew and then figure out how to bite it, then you're not telling people what you already know. You know this. You're sharing with them your process of discovery. You know, here it is. Here's the Civil War. Here's baseball. I didn't know this stuff. I don't know about jazz, so let me share with you. Look at Wynton. Look at Louis Armstrong. This is really great.
Yeah.
And I read an intellectual biography of Emerson, and the word enthusiasm, which he became attached to, comes from the Greek word God in us. So I think somehow when there is that passion and when there is that enthusiasm, it's possible to call a larger force and not just the kind of didactic, I need to make a film, I need to get from point A to point B. Yeah. That we're all interested that the whole be more than the sum of the parts, which means we're interested in more.
What's the difference, other than the fact you have more resources and you've honed your skills and all of that, between whatever you're working on now and what you did with Brooklyn Bridge? Is, for example, same process, same kind of cameras, same kind of everything?
Yeah, same kind of everything. We now just switched for the current projects to digital editing. But we're shooting still on 16mm film using the same cameras that we've always used, the same sort of methodology that we've done. I mean, and that's an important thing to stop and say, that a Brooklyn Bridge isn't Ken Burns, it's Buddy and Roger and Amy Steckler, right. that the Mark Twain, the last film that was out, isn't me, it's also Dayton Duncan and the editor Paul Barnes, who's been around, and Eric Ewers, and people who have done this stuff. And in a way, I have a job like a conductor, which is trying to get all the diverse parts contributing in the same way, and having almost a family atmosphere. So the people, we lost somebody a week ago in our organization, and it was amazing how people poured in from around the country who may have worked as an intern 5 years ago but knew this person, and there was a sense of it being truly a death in the family, and that's the way we want to have it.
You never want to do anything else, huh?
You know, each time people try to interest me subjects that are not American, I just say, wow, that's great, and then something just slows it down. And a couple times I've gone out to Hollywood, and I never want to sit here, Charlie, and say, you know, well, the reason why you don't like my film is because they made me change this, or they cut the ending, or they made me use this star, or whatever. If you don't like my film,
blame me.
It's all my fault, and that's the way I want it to be.
Yeah, me too. That's the way I feel. Statue of Liberty, nominated for an Academy Award. This clip features director Milos Forman and musician Ray Charles talking about freedom and the meaning of the Statue of Liberty. Tell me how this came about.
Well, I'd made the film on the Brooklyn Bridge. George Page at WNET said, you know, there's a centennial is coming up of the Statue of Liberty. Ever think of doing that? I said, well, you know, I'm going to get involved in this film on Huey Long, but I'll look at it. And Buddy and I just fell in love with it. He not only shot with me, but he co-produced. And it was wonderful. It wasn't just how it got built. It was what the symbolism was behind it. And Barbara Jordan's in it. Jerzy Kosinski's in it. It's a wonderful colloquy on liberty as well as where it came from. And now you look at it, we've digitized it all, and there in the background, in sort of unbelievably new meaning, is the World Trade Center. Just like the opening shots of Brooklyn Bridge have exquisitely beautiful shots of the World Trade Center. And that's where history has a way of constantly changing, even something as recent as Brooklyn Bridge and Statue of Liberty, because things happen.
When you say digitally remastered, what does that mean?
Well, when we shot it, we shoot in 16mm, and then we go 2 or 3 generations and transfer crudely to video, say the Civil War. And you get a lot of grain and the movement of this thing, and we were mono soundtrack. So this time we've gone back to the original negative and digitized from that negative, so it looks sharp. I've been watching all week, and it's better than I've ever seen.
Now, you don't re-edit, but you
No, we didn't retouch a thing. It was just a way of improving the quality of the transfer.
So you're going back to like
from
first generation or something?
First generation.
And the sound is...
We remixed it in stereo, so it's terrific. And the DVD is probably the apotheosis of what you can get. Looks great.
Can I buy that?
Yes, you can, Charlie, and my children and Yale University and all other places will be very happy.
And any interviews on these?
Yeah, we went to Shelby again. PBS did, and interviewed him, Stanley Crouch,
we're talking about Shelby
George
Foote, right?
And you know, just asking.
And George Will.
And Stanley Crouch, and the musicians who wrote the beautiful theme song, and I do a little commentary in some scenes, and I think it's good.
I know it is. Roll tape, Statue of Liberty.
I don't think anybody who was born in this country really cares. I think that if this show is for American audiences, forget it. No, it's, you know, you are born here and you take everything for granted, and all you really mainly see is what bothers you and what irritates you. You know, we are so complacent, it's so easy to accept pleasant things. It's like that I should be here, and that I am, you know, entitled to them, you know. No, I think that this pile of granite and iron means a lot only for people who came from abroad, who came following that light in the torch.
You know, we're so used to freedom. I mean, we're so used to doing whatever we want. We're so used to, if we want to insult the president, we do it. But you know, when you look around the world, if you travel, you begin to realize right away that we the only people can do all this in the world without any static.
When you go to these guys like Ray Charles, I mean, are they ready, able, and willing to join because they're caught up in the project, or is it?
Most of them
depends.
are. Ray was wonderful. You know, the guy works 365 days a year, so we caught him in Andover, Massachusetts, in a dressing room between sets. It's the only, you know how we like to lovingly shoot people and set it up and whatever.
He said, show up here and I'll do it.
So, you know, it was like cinder blocks and mirrors and an aide moving in the background, and it was the worst composed shot we've ever had. But he's so great, so great.
Yeah. Oh, man. Civil War, when we talked about digitally remastered and being able to rebuy it now and better, that's one of them.
Yeah.
The other is Lewis and Clark, the two I've seen.
Yeah.
Are there others?
Yeah, we've now gone back and digitized everything. So the
but are they all available on new DVDs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's very exciting to us because before, you know, the generational transfers are beginning to wear a little thin. So it looks terrific.
And shot some new interviews with people like Shelby and people like that as part of this.
As part of the thing.
And then you had some very fine old interviews that you put in there too. Did
well,
you not?
we think that the film standard there. And the interesting thing is everybody.
You included an interview you and I did. I'm being facetious.
That's right. No, we did indeed. I'm sorry.
And you've used that in terms of conversations we
and
had.
uniting the themes that we've been talking about today, because we've been talking about this for a long time.
Civil War. It's the first line, I believe, of your obituary 100 years from now when they write it, don't you think?
I think it will be. I hope it's not, because I hope that means
You'll
that
do something better,
something will be better. You know, they asked Duke Ellington what his favorite composition was. He said the one I'm working on now, and I sort of feel that.
Or the next
but there's
one.
something about the alchemy of the production with my brother Rick struggling to figure out how to take what had been successful in an hour or an hour and a half, and suddenly it was it was going to be 5 1 hours, and all of a sudden it was 11 and a half, and it was working, and it's about the most important event in American history that has all of that thing. Rick and I coming from a family where our mother had died, and here was the great traumatic event in the childhood of our country, and we were struggling still as young men to deal with the tragedy that had overtaken our family, and there was so much talking between those things that I can't imagine duplicating the kind of intensity that went on in the editing room.
Was it day by day a journey of discovery?
Yeah, always. In fact, you know, we work on, I should say, with Jeff Ward, who's been a writer since Huey Long, and just learning new things. We never wanted any time for the script to be done until we locked the editing. We wanted it always to be evolving. We added something on the last day, not subtracted, which was, right, the way it should be. We wanted to be open to the process, to be influenced by new materials that Barbara Fields would send us about African Americans who were not passive bystanders, but active, dedicated, self-sacrificing soldiers in this intensely personal war of self-liberation. We wanted to honor that. We wanted to explode some of the old myths, and it seemed very important to us all the way through that we didn't decide in advance. So that we didn't have enemies. There's only 2 enemies in that film. One is slavery, which I'm unapologetic, and the other is George McClellan, which I feel a little bit bad. He was a tardy...
But George? Why do you feel bad for George?
He didn't want to hurt any of his own men. I mean, any mother listening to that, contemplating a war in Iraq, will say, I want a general to protect my son that way. So, you're torn on the bias a little bit, but in terms of a war that had to be fought, that had to be won, as I believe the Civil War was, then George McClellan has to get out of the way, and we made him a little bit of a...
What did Lincoln finally say? If you're not going to use that army general, give it to me?
Give it to me, yeah. And he actually, the most chilling thing I've ever heard from a president is Abraham Lincoln. He says, this war will be won when I find the general who understands the arithmetic, meaning the ability to send back dead bodies to Washington and to keep going straight. And he found that general. His name was U.S. Grant, and that's how the war was won. And that is a chilling thing. And that's what we always have to remember in wars, is that it involves cost and not enthusiasm. And I think that's one of the lessons of the Civil War, too.
Cost, not enthusiasm.
Meaning that they all thought it was going to be a 90-day war. They all trotted out with their picnic baskets to watch us thrash the Rebs at First Manassas, and it didn't happen. And it ended up being a 4-year war. And now there's always something in the blood of human beings that get excited about war, and that has to be tempered when you look at the photographs of this.
The Civil War is like Napoleon. People cannot write enough books. There's a new book about Antietam.
All the time. I mean, we just passed the 140th anniversary of Antietam, and I think it used to be axiomatic in publishing that when you were having a bad season, you put out a Civil War book, because they sell, and of course it sells. Because distort it as we do, disguise it, ignore it as we always do, Civil War is there influencing almost every aspect of our national life.
The letter that is so famous.
Sullivan Ballou.
Where'd you find it?
Well, I had been begging our unbelievable distinguished panel of advisors to send us historical first-person stuff, and really the only person that was doing it was Barbara Fields, who was working with the Freedman Project and knew all these African-American stuff. But Don Fehrenbacher, who's since deceased, who's a great scholar of the causes of the war, and Lincoln, sent this letter without anything, and it just said, a week before the First Battle of Bull Run, Sullivan Ballou, a major in the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteers, wrote home to his wife in Smithfield, "Dear Sarah." And then at the bottom it said, Sullivan Ballou was killed a week later at the First Battle of Bull Run. It is, I can't begin to tell you how galvanic that letter was for the film and for the aftermath. I still get dozens of requests for people to send it. Today, somewhere in America, 500 times at a funeral or a wedding, that letter has been read along with the music, Ashokan Farewell. It is what every man wishes he could say to the woman he loves. It's what every woman wishes her man could say to her. And it is the most stunning letter I've ever come across. It just came over the transom, and I read it, and I couldn't get through it, and I looked up, and everyone in the office was in tears, and I said, we're putting this at the end of the first episode. It's about the love of country, the love of family, the love of wife, the love of children, and more important, the love between two human beings that transcends any of that. And to put that in one letter, so innocently configured, is just one of the amazing things. And I had it. It was not the original letter. I've carried this thing around in my wallet for 1987. It was somewhere in the spring of 1987 when this thing came in, and this stuff has fallen apart in my wallet.
Is this it or not?
This is it.
Oh my God! Look at this.
And sometimes when I'm speaking, I'll take it out and read it, but oh, Sarah, if the dead can come back to those.
Do you know it by heart?
I used to do it all, and then I get so worried about how beautiful it is and how much trouble I have, doing it.
Okay, is it there? There you go.
Yeah. And that's it. And
Can you read the first part?
Yeah. Well, I think the first sentence, the indications of, dear Sarah, the indications are very strong that we shall move in a few days, perhaps tomorrow, and lest I should not be able to write you again, I feel impelled to write a few lines that may fall under your eye when I am no more.
I have no misgivings about or lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged, and my courage does not halt or falter. I know how American civilization now leans upon the triumph of the government, and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the Revolution. And I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence can break. And yet my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly with all those chains to the battlefield. The memory of all the blissful moments I've enjoyed with you come crowding over me, and I feel most deeply grateful to God and you that I've enjoyed them for so long. And how hard it is for me to give them up and burn to ashes the hopes of future years, when, God willing, we might still have lived and loved together and see our boys grown up to honorable manhood around us. If I do not return, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I loved you, nor that when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. Forgive my many faults and the many pains I have caused you. How thoughtless, how foolish I have sometimes been. But oh, Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth,
and flit unseen around those they love. I shall always be with you in the brightest day and the darkest night. Always. Always. And when the soft breeze fans your cheek, it shall be my breath, or the cool air your throbbing temple. It shall be my spirit passing by. Sarah, do not mourn me dead. Think I am gone, and wait for me.
For we shall meet again.
God.
And he just, I mean, it's what it's all come down to. And I think it's, you know, we always tend to take events like the Civil War from that aerial perspective, and that's important. Arrows on the maps and the great minds that mastermind, and of course the words of Lincoln surpass anything, and it was perfectly appropriate for Pataki to read it at the September 11th memorial. But then when you realize that the fighting is done, the Gettysburg Address, that the fighting is done by these people, and the dying is done by these people, and then they give the kind of foundation and the base for that. I mean, that's, it seems to me, what our history should be about, and why most people don't like history is because they've been force-fed the tinder that dry dates and facts and events are, and somehow there's a liquidity to that emotion.
Yeah. I think what other people more eloquent than I am have said this better than I have, but in a sense you gave context, texture, passion, feeling, even visualization to history, and that made it real for so many people. I mean, Stephen Ambrose said most Americans get their history from Ken Burns and any other source. Doesn't matter. What matters is that it has such a compelling quality for people, and that therefore, you know, it comes inside of them, and then it takes them inside of history.
We are rightly suspicious of sentimentality and nostalgia.
Right.
It's the enemy of good history and almost the good anything. And yet we resort, therefore, to a safer kind of logical, rational existence. And that, for the most part, gets us all through our days. But we know the things that really animate our concerns, and what our art tells us, our music tells us, our literature tells us, the paintings and sculpture and dance tell us, is that there's a kind of higher emotional intelligence. And I think that's what we yearn for. And that's what we ought to tilt towards, even in our history. It could still be fact-based. Let's not make errors, not promulgate the myths, and take the easy steps. But at the same time, can we not engage a higher emotional intelligence that is actually superior in its logic, if you will, than a rational thing? Because that's what sustains us. It's what the relationships and the work that you've done, that you value most strongly, come from that. So why not have an approach to history that looks for that, that is an emotional archaeology that we've talked about before. And if you're digging for that, then the dry dates and facts come up, and that the shards can reconstruct a civilization that once was, but it would have some vibrancy and have some sense that the past was as alive as we are now. The great arrogance, of course, of the present is that because we are alive and they are not, we must be somehow superior to them. But they felt rage and jealousy in the same way that we do. They had intelligence and brilliance. I mean, look at our media culture and the way it's kind of smoothed out all the edges. We don't understand about heroism very much now. Greeks and Romans have more to tell us about heroism than we do in our current conversation today. And it permits us, if you have that kind of intelligent investigation, it permits us to trust the evidence of the past, to be a much better teacher than anything that we can sort of interpose between it.
Lincoln was the most eloquent of men.
He's the most important president that we have. He said it all. And as a young lawyer in 1838, well before the Civil War, he stepped up at the Young Men's Lyceum in Springfield, Illinois, and said, "Whence shall we expect the approach of danger? Shall some transatlantic giant step the earth and crush us at a blow?" Then he answered his own question, "Never. All the armies of Europe and Asia could not by force take a drink from the Ohio River or make a track on the Blue Ridge in the trial of 1,000 years. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we will live forever or die by suicide." He was the king. He presided over the closest this country has ever come to near national suicide. And yet there's something optimistic in the acknowledgement of two benign neighbors, two great oceans, that from the burning of the White House in the War of 1812 to September 11th was a force field that protected the Republic. And yet underlying it was the sense that we would always be the agents of our own undoing. And you see it even now in the fabric of our continually fascinating political discourse, that we're going to be undone by ourselves if we are. Otherwise, it will live for all time, as he said.
If you love language as I do, I mean, it's just the capacity to...
We cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield to every patriot grave, from every living heart and hearthstone, all over this broad land, will yet again swell the chorus of the Union, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. I mean, this is a poet as well as a president.
And where did he get it?
He got it from Shakespeare and the Bible, which is basically what he read. He got it from his own innate intelligence and shrewdness, which is something we forget about Abraham Lincoln. He's an incredible politician, and I think he got it from some unbelievable understanding of who we were as a living, breathing, beating entity, the United States of America. So he could take a faltering declaration and invest it at Gettysburg with new meaning that not only gave us a conscious shock as a nation to go forward, but permitted those old documents, now tired and worn out, particularly the Declaration, by the monumental hypocrisy of slavery that it tolerated, the man who wrote the creed owning other human beings, that he's rescued them as well, and I think has given us the energy in some bizarre way to continue.
I want to skip to Frank Lloyd Wright, 1998. This program loves architects, as you know.
I do.
Frank Lloyd Wright, perhaps, probably, the greatest architect of this century.
I
don't
so.
know who. We know who all the other great ones, many of them are, but I mean, I think he's probably the greatest. 2 volumes.
Yeah.
2 separate nights devoted to Frank.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
Now, did you have the same passion for him, or did you just simply go and say, look, this is an admirable man with a great sense of enormous talent and an ego to match,
right?
Who is a story worth telling?
It's a story worth telling, and the more we got into it, the more passionate. And I say we because this is an equal film with Lynn Novick, who is a great producer and other stuff. We wanted to figure out how you could contain, and we tried to do it later on with Mark Twain, how you could contain someone who was so startlingly well known for what they did, that is, the works of literature of Twain or the works of architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, but at the same time have very complicated personal lives. And it's often easier and simpler to ignore that stuff, particularly with Frank Lloyd Wright, to ignore the many transgressions against family and friends and creditors and clients. I mean, even today in Wisconsin, there's bad blood because of Frank Lloyd Wright's behavior 70 years ago.
No, he was
but
not
you
the
needed to
nicest of men.
find, no, he was not. And you need to find a way where the 2 seemingly parallel tracks of a life, one personal and one professional, finally bend and meet. And that, to me, helps you gain insight even into the genius, because we tend to separate the problems of the personal life when we look at a genius. You know, do we look with as close an eye at Picasso's misogyny, for example, as we look at his extraordinary body of work? Well, we should, and we tried to do that.
And you see him in the painting. I spent the weekend with Lance Armstrong, saying that the battle against cancer and winning the Tour de France, there are parallel things in his life that come together.
That's right.
The will to win and the event
that is
the test of his athleticism.
The failure of our popular discourse, our media culture, is to only acknowledge one thing or the other, cancer or this. But what we look for in life, and which makes that example so perfect, is that we struggle in our art and our music and our literature to figure out a way to reconcile these opposites. How do you have cancer, and how do you win the Tour de France? And when you do that, it's like the yin and the yang, you see the whole.
Here is Frank Lloyd Wright.
My father taught me that a symphony was an edifice of sound. And I learned pretty soon that it was built by the same kind of mind in much the same way that a building is built. And when that came to me, I used to sit and listen to Beethoven. He was a great architect. The 2 minds are quite similar because they arrange and build, plot and plan in very much the same way.
There's a wonderful passage from Emerson, which seems to me to come closer to capturing Frank Lloyd Wright than any other, in which he says, "Every spirit builds itself a house, and beyond its house a world, and beyond its world a heaven. Know then that the world exists for you. Build therefore your own world." And that vision of the romantic genius, the artist, taking the world and reinventing it, making it in its own right, following that personal idiosyncratic vision, is utterly what Frank Lloyd Wright is about.
Any self-criticism from Ken Burns, who says what about what he wished he'd done more of, what he might have missed, what the road not taken?
You know, I look back at the stuff, and the retrospective has forced me to look back, and people want to know whether you changed something. I don't think so. It's more like a family album. I've had the great good fortune to work in PBS. I've been my own master, so the mistakes I've made have been mine. And so I hope that I'm learning over the course how to make better films. But I can see there's a continuous effort to have a passion and a kind of honesty and genuineness, a complication about American history. There's 1,000 things I want to do, and if I were given the time, I don't think I'd ever leave American history.
You might not have done more anything, or less. You might not. There may have been someone you missed and you wish, or whatever.
Well, you always get that, you know, and sometimes they're serious, but we never were at a point in our making of the film where we didn't consider that question more than the, I think, relatively facile criticism that, say, would come from a Jazzerati guy who says, "Why did you leave out this guy?"
Exactly.
Well, we thought and fought and cried and woke up at 4 in the morning worried about why he was left out.
No, it's a little bit like how many emails do I get about why didn't you have so-and-so on, not knowing that I made 100 phone calls trying to get so-and-so on to be here. You know?
And the other good thing is that if you've made a 17-and-a-half-hour film, as Jazz is, and the biggest criticism is what you've left out, and that's you're doing okay.
And you are indeed. The Civil War is airing nightly this week on PBS at 8 p.m. and Ken Burns' American Stories of the Statue of Liberty re-premieres on September 30th at 9 p.m. Ken Burns, a friend of this broadcast, a friend of America because of his love affair with America, and certainly one who has influenced greatly the face of public television. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.